Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. This is your host Boutique. Good to be back after a little hiatus in the past month. Just taking care of some health related issues and getting some R&R, but it's good to be back. It's been a really intense and stressful time for everybody. And we've been definitely still working behind the scenes quite a bit here at Progressives Abroad to support and address a lot of the ongoing situations with the demonstrations that have been occurring in the United States and internationally as it's related to the uh, horrible murder of George Floyd and again the kind of surgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. So we're definitely in solidarity with all of that, and we'll be breaking that down and keeping you up to date on our thoughts of the interesting interviews and pertinent information about that. But the most important thing that we're trying to keep up to date right now is our ability to be allies and stand in solidarity with movements like the Black Lives Matter movement, knocking down police brutality and institutional and systemic racism in the United States and also throughout the world. So there's some ways that we're doing that. Um, for example, if you've seen on our page recently, we've had some online events, some musical events through Open Mic, our other channel, raising money for the Bail Project in the United States. As well, we're going to continue to raise up certain artists and other organizations that we know who are using whatever skills they possibly can to help in any possible way, whether it's financially or through services that they can offer free of charge, anything like that. So please, if you're not already following our page on Facebook or our account on Twitter, please go find us, Progressives Abroad Podcast, over there on Facebook, and also on Twitter. Now, on with the show for today. So today, we raised the question, what is it like to be reporting abroad? We hear a lot about it in the news, especially nowadays. Journalists and journalism, news has found itself to be in a precarious position between the truth and research and investigation and certain entities, namely President of the United States and other global leaders who have kind of latched onto this idea of fake news. And we've got a good friend of the show. His name's Zak Bennett. He has been published. He's a journalist, a mixed media, we could say journalist. He's been published in the Wall Street Journal. He's been published in Vice, Huffington Post, as well as he's the regional chair of the National Press Photographers Association, I think down in South Florida, if I got it right. I know he's based in Miami, Florida right now, but he's lived all around the world, including in the South America and the Middle East, and currently his area of specialty is kind of Latin America, as well as the South and throughout the United States and the Caribbean. So we spoke with Zak a couple weeks ago, actually to give a little to give a little context on the timing, just a little bit before the murder of George Floyd. So unfortunately, we didn't get to touch on that and the aspect of reporting these kinds of issues in journalism, as well as reporting these kinds of issues, social justice issues, as well as reporting in demonstrations and whatnot. But we'll get onto that in a further episode. But what we did touch on in this part one of this interview is basically we're going to talk a lot about reporting abroad. Also, the ideas of local reporting versus sending foreign reporters to different places, and how it is to be a foreign reporter going to report in an area and how to represent that. And we're going to touch a lot on Zak's journey and work and reporting at the Migrant Caravan. He spent quite a bit of time with the Migrant Caravan coming through Central America and up through Mexico. So he's got some interesting stuff to tell us about that. It's a really cool interview. I had a great time recording it and talking about it. So interesting. And I already know we'll have him back on the show again. But without further ado, everybody, please enjoy part one of this interview with journalist Zak Bennett. See you on the other side. World. I'd like to welcome our good friend of the show, Zak Bennett, to the show. Thanks for coming on the show today. How you doing? Where are you right now?
Good. I'm in Miami Beach, and thanks for having me.
Miami Beach. Yeah.
I'm a fan of the show.
Yeah, fan of the show, good friend of the show. Thanks for coming on. So you are a photojournalist. What is the difference between like what makes a photojournalist a photojournalist? What's the difference between a journalist and a photojournalist?
Well, a journalist is like an umbrella. So you got writers, you got videographers, you got on-camera talent, you have photographers, you have all kinds of journalists. So a photojournalist is just one kind of journalist that reports via visuals generally, but I kind of do, I guess, more like mixed media, where I do writing and photography and teaching and videography, drone. I do a little bit of everything and incorporate graphics and all kinds of stuff to tell the story or make the story complete.
Yeah, and so I've been following your work for a long time, and the reason why I've been trying to get you on the show for a while is because although right now you're currently based in Miami, from what I understand, you've lived in a lot of different places around the world, and I've seen your photos throughout the years. I think I've been following your work at least for the past decade now, and I mean, I love your photography. You take some really and I might share some of this in the links below. You take some really great, like, kind of personal photos, portraits of people in different moments, random moments, crucial moments, emotional moments. Just so really amazing artwork, and I'll definitely try to share that. But you've also done it all around the world, so you've had a lot of experience covering disasters, covering special events, meeting with politicians, famous people in all kinds of places. Can you just give us an idea of some of the places around the world you've been reporting?
Yeah, so I started my like international reporting in Brazil, but since then I reported extensively in Israel and Palestine, in South America. I was in South America for 3 years reporting, and more recently, I ended up in Miami. But now I still, because Miami's proximity to the Caribbean and Latin America, I'm able to report here in Florida, which is a really crazy place to be a reporter, and also can easily get down to the Caribbean if there's any problems or disasters or anything that happens. People go missing. They send someone like me from a close place like Miami to go figure out what happened or what is happening on the ground in those places. So even though I'm not reporting abroad anymore, I'm able to go abroad, uh, you know, almost monthly, I would say, or a dozen times a year, sometimes more. But yeah, about 50% of the time I'm on the road, just doing stories about anything my editors tell me or something I pitch. And yeah, so I've been around, probably reported in about 35 countries, maybe a little more.
So do you have I mean, okay, do you have like a particular motivation behind this, or like what first got you into taking pictures?
Yeah, so I mean, I got into pictures when I was a kid, but I mostly got into it because I saw a lot of, stories around the world that I knew about, that I researched on my own, and I realized, they were underreported. So the original like motive in getting into journalism or reporting was to tell stories that are untold, or expose information or promote more transparency. As you get, working as a journalist, you end up reporting on all kinds of things, anything from sensational news to giant natural disasters and terrorist attacks. But obviously the original point in getting into journalism is to share, stories that need to be told. That's your hope as a journalist, is to tell those stories. But that's obviously not every day of work, unfortunately.
Yeah, the taking of the photo it sounds to me it's kind of a commodifiable skill, whereas of course it's just like any other art form. Kind of the architects really would like to build their dream buildings, but of course they have to do kind of the dirty work too.
Sure, yeah.
The bread and butter.
But yeah, at the end of the day, I do see it as an art form. So, or that's what I consider. I always consider myself as an artist, even if I'm shooting something really remedial and boring. I still try to find the art in that.
Yeah. So just out of curiosity, do you see any, now that you've lived abroad and you've worked abroad and now you've like moved back to the States and now you're working there, but still kind of going abroad sometimes, do you see any difference between like in working and doing your job when you were living abroad as opposed to now living back in your home country and then going abroad? Do you prefer one of these types of situations?
Yeah, I think after I was reporting abroad for maybe like almost like the past decade of my life. I was abroad, and now I'm kind of where I came from in Miami, and it's definitely different to report abroad while living in the United States, but it's a lot more comfortable to be able to go out and get the news and retract, and kind of like a snake. Um, but there is nothing that compares to having a reporter in a place like, say, Israel or Palestine, and they're reporting on the news while they're there, because you get like an unparalleled understanding of the situation. Or having a local report on the news is always the best option, to have someone that actually lives there to report. But that's not always so easy for publications to find people in every location that they can rely on to report the news honestly, accurately, etc.
Yeah, that was actually something that I was very I was thinking about asking a little bit later, but now that you bring it up, there's this idea where you have the reporter, which I guess is kind of what you do. You report, you live in one place and you kind of are sent off by different publications to go report around the world. I guess your region is around Miami, that kind of area of the Caribbean and whatnot. But
Yeah.
have you seen any like shift in that in more recent times? Is there any regard in the industry for trying to raise up more local reporters rather than send out reporters to different places? Have you seen anything like that happening? Because it seems like it would make sense, but
Like an effort to not send reporters as much and use local reporters.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's been a lot of efforts like that, and publications like really just don't have the money anymore to send. Even the biggest publications in the world, they don't have the money anymore to send reporters everywhere, and fly and stay in hotels. It's not sustainable. But it's kind of like a band-aid to send a reporter somewhere that to tell the news. But yeah, there's been a lot of efforts to try to get citizens more involved with the news reporting and the news cycle. And I've been a part of that in the past, where we've tried to start agencies where we use local photographers and local writers to tell the news in their neighborhood. And when I was just saying that because when I worked at Demotics News, we the idea was to like have locals report the news, and it's a lot more cost effective, and they have local knowledge of what they're reporting on. Because a lot of times you send a journalist into a random country and you tell them to get a story, and you give them 1 week to get the story, and how are you supposed to learn a culture and learn how society works and the politics, just being in a place for a few days? You can you can barely even like scratch the surface.
Yeah, it's kind of like this old idea when you read a lot of the early, ethnographic field work in anthropology. You read all these stories about, kind of, Eurocentric, colonialist kind of perspective on it. So, I mean, do you have any experience with that? What is it like to go report for a small amount of time in a place that you've never been before, but still try to represent it in kind of an ethical way? Do you find some challenges with that, or have you developed some kind of techniques or abilities with this?
Yeah, I guess the big obstacle with reporting is a lot of the time, you have to underreport. Like you might go to a place and find out all kinds of information, expose all kinds of details, but you actually can't report everything you find, um, because it wouldn't be ethical to just make like wide umbrella blanketed statements about a situation. So a lot of the reporting you see abroad or about a situation or a conflict is pretty surface level. Like if you look at any conflict around the world where we send a reporter from a major Western publication, you're probably getting a pretty surface level report unless they're spending tons of money and sending investigative reporters on the scene. Um, yeah, I mean, the only way to get, you know, the down and dirty deep news is to check the local publications, and a lot of times those are in like the local language too. So when I get sent down to the Caribbean or something, I have to read every single little newspaper as soon as I get there. And a lot of the time translation's a problem, or some of these islands or countries have their own languages and they have small populations. So it's hard to even, translate the language. But yeah, so most of the reporting we do is, I would say, pretty surface level, um, when they're just sending a journalist abroad.
Hmm, that's interesting. So it almost kind of sounds on the surface level, it sounds almost like some kind of photo elicitation technique. Like I take this photo, I'm going to show it to you guys. What do you think about this? And then there's just a little title, but of course it's like the old saying, there's a picture has 1,000 words. So
Yeah, and nowadays people are gonna kind of draw their own conclusions based on your photos too. So you have to be really careful.
how much, I'm just curious because I know, when you're doing like, ethnographic research, you usually, I'm losing my key terms right now, but usually if you're going to enter like a new culture that you're trying to do research on or report on, write about, you're usually going to find like a primary source or somebody that's like the gatekeeper into the community. Of course, this is
Yeah,
usually stuff that takes a long time if you're doing like deep investigations and you're getting embedded and whatnot. But do you
yeah.
find yourself relying on such kinds of sources?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, like your social collateral in reporting, or the people you know, is how you get your stories. And even abroad, as soon as I get on the ground, I start writing, local radio reporters, local news reporters, and generally they're really eager to work with foreign journalists, or to show you around, or to tell you what they know. Sometimes they're protective with their information because they have a scoop, and they might not want to share the scoop. But I'd say 9 times out of 10, as soon as I get to a country, I just start reaching out to other journalists, and they're the ones that can kind of help you construct the story. But then you ask yourself, why aren't these people just telling the story to the world? But it's because they actually don't have the outlet or the capacity to tell the story to the world. They work for, I don't know, a local publication in Santo Domingo, and you know only people in that city or that island read it. But those people have the most information about what's happening. Um, so yeah.
So what kind of, I mean, when you've been in some of more recent times, maybe what kind of issues have you been reporting on in, and just describe a little bit about the general region that you've been reporting on in the past couple of years.
So yeah, I've been just been reporting in Miami, Florida, southeastern United States, anywhere from the Carolinas to Alabama down to Miami and the Keys, the Florida Keys, and then we go all the way down into South America for reporting from here, which is it's kind of crazy to think about. You would think major publications would have more resources in those places, but really they're relying on just a few people to get the stories out, and then they're people like me that are kind of on the run, moving very fast, and scrambling to get a story on a somewhat tight deadline.
Hmm.
So yeah, I would say resources are quite low, but yeah, that's
Yeah, it's interesting though how you like how you break it down because yeah, I mean, because at first I was kind of thinking, yeah, okay, so if there's all these small reporters everywhere in all these different countries, why would they send someone like you all the way from like the United States or somewhere to go down and get it? But it's not really necessarily from this kind of no longer at least from this kind of like outsider colonialist kind of perspective, but to me it sounds like you are representing this publication and kind of sent there to exactly do that, like collect these resources from like local perspective.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it, because you can send someone like me down there, and yeah, the publication trusts me to find the right people to get the right story. Um, but yeah, there's really no way to do it on your own or quick. You definitely need to. You're always asking for favors and help from others. Um, but yeah, like one example of that is I know the New York Times has a Metro desk, and on the Metro desk in a city like New York, it's a big Spanish speaking city, and they
Hmm.
have, I believe, two Spanish speaking reporters on the Metro desk. And then when I was in Mexico uh, reporting on the migrant caravan that was coming up from Central America, headed for the U.S. border from Mexico. When I was there, I ran into the Metro desk reporter that speaks Spanish. So one of their two Spanish-speaking reporters on the Metro desk, which is the desk that generally covers the city, like city reports.
Hmm.
She was down there too, and so it that kind of shows how like the newspapers are using their resources and sending people to different places. And maybe it's an issue that reporter was passionate about, or maybe it's just who they had available to go down to Mexico for a couple weeks to tell that story.
So that's interesting. Let's dive a little deeper into that example. So you were when was that with the migrant caravan? That was about what was that, about a year ago this story was happening?
I think it was 2 years ago now, when it was a more popular story, or like a more read story. Like it was like 2 to 3 years ago,
Hmm.
starting maybe 2.5 years ago.
And what was that like? So you get the call, got to go down, and they give you this big task, right? Go down. What was it? What was the task
Yeah,
they give
well,
you?
it's crazy. Now a lot of our reporting is based on things like the president says in the United States, whatever Trump says, and he tweets, and then people start getting interested in the story. And the migrant caravan's been happening for years,
Mm,
maybe more than a decade. And no one cared about the migrant caravan before this. They were doing it every single year, bringing hundreds, thousands of people from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, up through Mexico. And it's the same organization that's been doing it. But then 2 years ago, when they were coming up, Trump started tweeting about it quite a bit. And um, no one was reporting on it at that point. It was just some kind of passive crossing of people or migration. And then a BuzzFeed reporter, very like ad hoc, like reporter on his own, was down there with them, and he was reporting a little bit about it. So Trump got really excited and said he talked to the president of Mexico, and that they were dispersing the migrant caravan, and that the United States is safe. And these these, poor people are not going to be coming to our border anymore. So he kind of said it as like a braggadocious statement.
Mm.
And so when he tweeted that, my editors read it up in New York, and they were like, "Hey Zach, can you go?" They sent a reporter and I. They said, like, "Can you go figure out, if that's true? Did he really disperse the migrant caravan?" And so I started just chatting with uh, the guy from BuzzFeed, and he wasn't actually with like following the migrant caravan. He just had some knowledge of the migrant caravan and had been with them for a few days. And I believe I'm not totally sure on his story, but he wasn't present when I got there. So we just started looking on Twitter, and we found their location, and we weren't even sure if they were actually there. And so we just flew into Santa Cruz, rented a car, drove like 7 hours, and I was just looking on Twitter while my reporter was driving, and we seemed to find their location. And as far as we knew from Trump's tweets, was that the migrant caravan had been dispersed and they didn't exist anymore. And so then we pulled up to this what was it, like a outside stadium, gymnasium, playground in I forget the name of the town, but it's somewhere in southern Mexico. And of course, the migrant caravan was still there. So, and there was over 1,000 people there, just kind of in a refugee field situation.
Wow.
And we just started like flying the drone and interviewing people. And we immediately found like the head of the organization, which is the group called Pueblos Sin Fronteras. And we got interviews with him, and we interviewed the people. We found a lot of like transgender people that had been victims. So we did like a quick portrait series on those people that had just been like particularly targeted by gangs and mafia in Central America, because they're a more vulnerable population. So we kind of zoned in on them. And then we got some really, bombshell stories out of it, and pretty much proved that the president didn't disperse the migrant caravan. The migrant caravan was still there and still strong and still planning to head north to the border. So then we just stuck with him for a few days. And then more or less a media frenzy started in that situation. And then within a month, I think every single publication was down in Mexico, and I got sent back there twice to report on it more and more at the border. And then again, it all comes down to Trump's tweets. Like Trump tweeted that there were, I forget if he said Taliban or some terrorist organization was spotted inside the migrant caravan. So immediately my editor was like, can you go find out if that's true? So we were back down to Mexico, and we flew into Tapachula, which is right on the border of Guatemala. That's like the big, like, passing city. You'll find all kinds of people there. You'll find all kinds of people from, uh, Africa, and even Asia. You find a lot of like Indians there, like people
Wow.
straight from India. They all come to Tapachula, and then they make their way up north, or they some of them want to stay in Mexico too, because Mexico is also a land of opportunity for a lot of people. So yeah, we went back to Tapachula, and we tried to find out if this statement was true by the president, because it seemed like he's just trying to fearmonger. And we found out, they were most likely, I believe they're two Bangladeshi people that were somehow spotted in like a Telemundo report. And as far as we know, Trump just, or the 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 White House just kind of labeled them as Arabs or terrorists, or something that would potentially spark fear in people. And if you go to Tapachula, you see every language written on walls and signs and restaurants, because it is like an international crossing. So it's like no surprise that he saw two dark-skinned people that the the executive branch labeled as terrorists for some reason.
Mm.
Or But yeah, if you go to Tapachula today or tomorrow or a year ago, you're going to see Bangladeshis, Indians, Arabs,
People from
you'll see
everywhere.
people from all over Africa speaking, 20 different languages, and they all have their restaurants there too. So it's not like a secret or something. And they have hostels for certain groups of people. Like you'll see, there's one hostel that all the Pakistanis stay in, and then there's another hostel where all the Indians stay in, and they actually serve Indian food. And they
Mm.
have, it's like a very culturally diverse city. So that was the second time we went down there.
What is the attraction to that city? Is it how does everybody end up there? Did you find that out?
Well, yeah, they're coming through. I don't quote me, but there's certain countries in South America that are more lenient with visas, like Bolivia, and I believe they can accept people from all over the world much easier. So
Mm.
if a person does eventually want to end up in the United States, they can fly into a country like Bolivia and
Hmm.
then make their way to Central America. And if they make it to Tapachula, Mexico, there's an immigration office there, and they can get papers to stay for a month or 6 months. And some of them can get papers to work, and they can, plead political asylum and different things like that. And then you can try to make a life in Mexico, which I saw a lot of people struggling trying to do that. And then you can try to get up to the United States as well, and check in with the immigration office at the border, or find a way to cross the border. Um, but you're much closer to where you want to be there. Um, the the other thing the U.S. was trying to say was that it was a lot of gang members coming from Central America. Like,
Yeah, that's right.
uh, so we looked into that too. And the thing is in a lot of these Central American countries, uh, being involved in the gang is almost inevitable. Like you meet children. Like I met, youths in Tapachula that told me they had been involved in gangs, or they ran errands for gangs, and they really had no choice to do that. They were basically just very impoverished kids, and the gang members kind of tell them they're going to work for them, and if they don't, then they're pretty much dead. So it's not like these kids coming up across the border are necessarily dangerous or violent gang members conspiring to take over the country. They're just people like fleeing violence, and a lot of them have the wounds to show it. I saw people with wounds in their head and their face and all over their body, and stab wounds, and they're telling me, this is what I'm trying to get away from. I'm not trying to like make a branch of my gang in the United States. They had no option where they lived in their uh, in their little towns. So
See, now this is I would say for the most part should be obvious to a lot of people. You would assume that if somebody is gonna take all this time and all this effort to leave their home and walk 2,000 miles or whatever to a place where they don't have no security and no guarantee of ability to stay, that they're probably leaving for a good reason. They have no resources to go and invade or take over another country or something like that. It's totally
yeah,
crazy. Like, so you're down there, and I mean, I've seen your articles, and I mean, yeah, I'd say a lot of the time it is very just like, this is what's happening, but why do you think that narrative doesn't really make it into a lot of the mainstream media? Because you would think any decent person sitting at home, if they heard that story about these 17-year-olds that, yeah, they were in a gang, but now they want to get out of it, and the best way they can figure out how to do that is just hop on the trail and start walking.
hmm
Why do you think that narrative, that headline never really, I never see that headline too much?
yeah. So, well, first of all, like these kids, like they just don't have a choice. So I wouldn't even consider them gang members, or
Yeah.
a lot of them are from MS-13, which is considered a really dangerous gang across the Western world.
Hmm.
But but um but yeah, I wouldn't even consider them gang members. They're victims of their impoverished scenarios in their countries, which they
Yes.
were born into. But um the information's out there, but I think overall the U.S. uh, historically speaking, is afraid of, foreigners, and they think they're trouble. Yeah, people are just worried about letting more people into the country, and I think it's like you can read the story that
Hmm.
tells how the situation is and have compassion, empathy for others
Yeah.
in countries next door, but people often choose to just say no, like just shut the door on it. It's like voluntary ignorance. So I think a lot of people have chosen that path, and that is an easier path. It allows you to not think about it as much. It gives you an answer, an all-encompassing answer.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's
Yeah, because I'm just thinking. I mean, of course, I feel like I kind of know the answer to this because it's not a sensational enough headline. But I mean, wouldn't it, would it, what if we lived in a world where there was a headline that said like, you know, uh, youths who were, victimized youths, flee to safety to the United States. I mean, you don't see headlines like that.
yeah, because they are victims and they're children. A lot of them, like at least the one I did a story on one kid that was, I believe, 16. He was an MS-13, and this kid was sweet. He was harmless. I could, you know, he was just like a tiny little kid. He looked like a child to me.
Hmm.
And I understand anybody can be dangerous, but this this kid was fleeing, something he was a victim of. And when the country makes big sweeping statements saying, the migrant caravans filled with rapists and murderers and gang members, they're lumping these kids who are actually victims into that statement. And the thing is, the truth is, I go down and ask these kids, "Oh, were you in MS-13?" And they say, "Yeah, I was." So there's the tweets and the statements by the government aren't entirely wrong, but technically they're not telling the whole story. They're just giving like a sweeping statement about uh, these people. And then in the same on that note, when Trump tweeted, that the migrant caravans filled with rapists and murderers and whatever and gang members, I was in the migrant caravan for a couple weeks, and I talked to as many people as possible. Literally, the reporter and myself, as soon as he tweeted that, we started just going like up to every single person we had been talking to and interviewing more people. We maybe talked to 100 people, and those people all were with their families. So we could say we talked to a few hundred people inside the caravan of a couple thousand, like 2,000. So we talked to a large percentage of those people, and no one had heard of any violence inside the caravan. They actually told us they all felt safer inside the caravan. Usually when you travel through Mexico or Central America, you can get trafficked and taken by gangs and taken by uh, you know anybody and their bad motives. But everyone I talked to in the migrant caravan, and I didn't even find one story uh, contradicting it, but everyone felt very safe in the caravan, and they felt like they're helping each other, and they felt like a big community. Um, so we found that statement to be untrue too, that it was filled with violence. And I always felt very safe inside the migrant caravan, and I I don't think anyone that was actually present there doubted that. But that one tweet changes everything, and that's people don't have to read the news after they read that tweet. They made their mind up, and they decided, this caravan's bad, and we already have our qualms about immigrants coming to the country and taking our jobs. So I think for most, general Americans, or at least I would say half the country, they made up their mind when they see tweets like that. They say, "Oh, well, that's the icing on the cake for the scenario. We're against immigration. We're against the migrant caravan."
Yeah, it's just kind of funny when you think of it from like a really wide perspective, and if you try to take that tweet or that headline and transfer it over to something else, like you don't ever you never hear the headline like there might be, you know molesters and rapists hanging out at the Nickelback concert. don't go there.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
your local Walmart might be full of gang members and people toting guns.
It's very true. Yeah. Your
Yeah,
local Walmart probably is.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
and
yeah.
all right, everybody. Thanks a lot, Zak Bennett, for coming in for an interview virtually here, all the way from Miami, Florida. Like I said, we will be back with part 2 coming up very soon. I just wanted to break it up a little bit because we did cover a lot of topics in this interview. Um, Super interesting. So just stay tuned to the channel. Like I said, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to follow us, and the next episode should be coming out in just a few days. I don't want to keep y'all waiting too long. And the next episode also we're going to talk a bit more about what's it like to be a reporter on the ground during the Trump administration here in the United States, and how, what is safety like, and reporting during the coronavirus, and the impact of citizen journalism. So that should be a really nice episode too. So looking forward to seeing y'all again quite soon, hearing y'all, having y'all to join us here on this Progressives Abroad podcast. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and all that jazz. And we will see you real soon. Peace.